Good afternoon again. Everyone, welcome to our weekly class in Ethics of the Fathers. But before we start, a few announcements. Number one, this coming Sunday, the class will be at 11 o'clock, as usual, on liberty and loyalty, a Jewish take on patriotism in honor of 4th of July. And we'll talk about patriotism, the meaning of liberty, and so on. Also, next week we'll have the class, God willing, but we're going to do it in the other room in the back, or that's the front actually, because this room is going to be set up for a reception for the bride and groom, my grandson and granddaughter-in-law. And everyone is invited, of course. Okay, we're doing the same Mishnah. This is the fourth week that we're doing this one. There's so much in it. So we did the one about a boor cannot be sin-fearing. So it's encouraging us to study. Or an ignorant person cannot be pious. Again, another encouragement to be knowledgeable, not to be an ignorant person. Then it talks about an obstacle to learning sometimes. If you're timid, if you're embarrassed, you're not going to ask questions, then that's not going to help you in learning. Likewise, if the teacher is impatient and he's very tough, doesn't like questions, he can't really be a teacher. That's an impediment to learning. And now we're up to the next piece. Another impediment. You got to over all the other impediments. You're not a boor, you're not ignorant, you're not a timid person, your teacher was a good teacher, and now you're set for life. You have all the good qualities that enable you to learn, but you got involved in business. So the Hillel, who's the author of this Mishnah, says someone who engages too much in business will become wise. Someone who engages too much in business cannot become wise. In other words, the business preoccupation is going to stand in the way of you acquiring more wisdom. Doesn't mean that you cannot be a smart person in Torah, we're talking about, and be a business person, but it's not going to enhance, it's not going to increase your knowledge. Your knowledge can only be increased by study of Torah. Usually in many disciplines, if you're good in one discipline, there's a chance that it'll help you for other disciplines. Interdisciplinary education is generally viewed as a positive thing. But when it comes to the knowledge of Torah, if you're engaged in business too much, it doesn't say you can't be engaged in business, because the rabbis of the Talmud themselves were involved in business. They had different professions. Some of them did business, actual business. Some of them were shoemakers or blacksmiths or farmers. They did all sorts of menial tasks and engaged in all sorts of enterprises. But if you're engaged too much, it's not going to add. That's the simple understanding of this Mishnah. So while we learned before that Torah is good with derech eretz, Torah is good when you combine it with a way of earning a living, especially the way Maimonides understood that rabbis should not be rabbis exclusively. It means they shouldn't get paid for their rabbinic work. They should be involved in some other way of earning a living. Although I have to always add that Maimonides was a single vote on that. Most other sages disagreed with the Rambam about that. That justifies rabbis getting salaries as rabbis, but certainly no one will disagree with the Rambam that if a rabbi gets his income from other types of work, like business, that's not a negative. But if you engage too much in it, that becomes a negative. It retards your ability to learn and develop further in your knowledge of Torah. This echoes the words of King Solomon in Proverbs. The way he puts it, and the way it's paraphrased, is Kitov Sachra mikol sechora. The merchandise, the business of Torah is greater than all other types of business or merchandise. In other words, there's nothing that could compare to the study of Torah, and the only way to enhance and to increase your study of Torah is through more study of Torah. You can't rest on your laurels. You can't rely that you're going to get your knowledge from other sources. There's a story told about the Rabbi who was once visiting. It was in the city of Berlin. No, I'm sorry. It's a similar story with the Rebbe. It's the Rebbe's predecessor's grandfather, Rabbi Shmuel was his name, and he was visiting other cities, and he came to a town with the Belzer Rebbe. The Belzer Rebbe was one of the great Galicianer Hasidic leaders from Galicia, from the city of Belz. A very holy man. And Rabbi Shmuel became the leader of Chabad, but this is before he became the leader. He was a business person. He engaged in business. And he came, and he always tried to hide his identity. No one should know that he was a great rabbi. And he acted like he was just like a run-of-the-mill business person. And there were a group of people who were there to greet the Belzer Rebbe, and the Belzer Rebbe would shake hands with everyone. And people were asking who this Rabbi Shmuel was. The people didn't know him because he was not from that area. And they said, well, he's a business person. He's a socher, a business person. And the Rebbe would shake everyone's hand casually. But when it came to the Rabbi Shmuel, he really squeezed his hand and he treated him with tremendous respect and deference. So someone said to the Rebbe, but Rebbe, he's just a business person. Why are you giving him so much respect and treating him differently from everyone else? He says, yes, he's in business, but which business is? The business that King Solomon refers to, Tov Sachra Mikol Schor, its merchandise, its business is better than all other enterprises. In other words, he recognized that this was all a cover, that even though he was in business, he was more than just a business person. He was a very holy person in his own right, and he didn't let his business in any way cloud his Torah knowledge or inhibit his growth in his Torah knowledge. In the 19th century, there was a rabbi whose name was Ephraim Zev Margolis. And he was one of the greatest rabbis in terms of his Talmudic scholarship. People, even the greatest rabbis, would consult with him because his knowledge he was on the top tier. If you had to talk about the top 10 Talmudists of that generation, he would probably be on that list. But he was also an extremely wealthy banker. He ran banks. Jews control all the banks. Well, maybe not all the banks, but some banks. He was a banker. And but it didn't detract from his Torah knowledge and his growth in Torah knowledge. He published many works and is extremely very well known and respected by everyone. But he was engaged in his business. He didn't just have other people run his business for him, but he had 2 hours every day where he told his wife, these 2 hours I am going to be devoting myself to the study of Torah. Don't interrupt me for anything. No matter how urgent it is, these 2 hours belong to Torah, and I'm not interested in interrupting them at all. Please don't interrupt me. So if anyone comes and wants to see me, make an appointment to see me after those 2 hours. And she respected that request for many, many years, probably even decades. And one time, after decades of not allowing anyone to interrupt his studies, some bankers from another city, another part of Europe, came to discuss a matter that was, the whole banking system depended on this meeting. This was not just a regular business meeting. And they said they have to speak to the rabbi because this is an emergency. And she said, I'm sorry, but he's in his study and I can't interrupt him for 2 hours. So come back in 2 hours. And they said, but this can't wait. This can't wait. We have to discuss this matter with him. So she thought to herself, look, for 20 or so years, I respected his request. I never let anyone interrupt him. But this is an exception. I'll make a one-time exception, and I'll let them in. And she let them in, and the rabbi discussed whatever he discussed with them, and he went back to his learning. After the 2 hours, he calls in his wife. He says, why did you interrupt my studies? We made up that you're never going to interrupt me in those 2 hours. So she said, but this was an exceptional case. I mean, for decades I didn't allow anyone in. I thought I could make one exception for an emergency case. He said, what would have happened if I had died and they come to see me and they come to, and ask you, we have to speak to the rabbi, the banker, it's an emergency. And you'd say, I'm sorry, but he's not available right now. But they said, but this is an emergency. Okay, I'll make an exception. But he's dead. He says, when I'm studying Torah, I'm dead to the rest of the world. There is nothing that exists other than the Torah that I'm studying for those 2 hours. And he said it's based on this week's Torah portion. It says in the Torah, when it talks about the laws of impurity contracted by contact with a dead body, it says, Zos Chukas HaTorah, Adam Kiyamas Ba'ohel. This is the statute of the Torah. This is the law of the Torah. And it goes on to say, a person who dies in a tent. So there's a Talmudic interpretation, not the simple meaning of it, that when it comes to Torah, Zos HaTorah, this is the Chukas HaTorah, this is the law of the Torah, you have to be dead in the tent. That when it comes to the Torah study, when you're devoted to Torah study, no matter how many times the phone rings, no matter how many interruptions, no matter how important they are, you don't exist because you're dead in relation to everything else. Now you can't do that all the time. His banks would shut down if he did that all the time. But there are certain times when you have to realize that when we're studying Torah, nothing else exists. Yes?
It reminds me of the passage in Torah that thou cannot see my face and live, that during this time of Torah study that you're literally...
You're not alive for anything else.
Yeah, you cannot see my face and live, yeah.
Right. Now, it says over here, and it's a matter of translation, they translate over here, nor will someone who engages too much in business become wise. There are two ways of translating it. The same word can be translated, nor will anyone who engages too much in business become wise. Or it could be translated, not everyone who engages too much in business becomes wise. In other words, according to one translation, it suggests that there could be exceptions to the rule. That's a general rule that if you're engaged too much in business, you can't really become wise. But some have the translation, nobody. It doesn't work for anybody. Some say that there are exceptions, and that they point to a story in the Talmud, where the Talmud says that if you're rich and you don't study Torah, you're in trouble, because you're not wealthier than Rabbi Elazar Bar Charsum, who was very wealthy, and in spite of that, he studied Torah. And he increased in his study in Torah. And his business didn't get in the way of his Torah study. So you can't use wealth as an excuse for not learning Torah. But that's yes?
Back 20 years ago, I read a book called All for the Boss about Rabbi Yosef Yaakov, who I think he immigrated to New York.
The chief rabbi of New York.
And he... originally, I think he had a dry cleaning shop, and every spare minute he devoted to Torah study.
Right.
And he attended many shurim, gave shurim, and when he was approached by others that their business was not doing well, he would say to them, what are you doing with your spare time if your business is not doing well? And he'd say, you sit and you study Torah.
Right.
And the biggest things for him were being part of a minyan for davening, and that your success comes from Hashem, and in order to connect with Hashem, you must study.
Good, very good point. Now, the Hebrew word for business is sechora. The root of that word is a circle, to go around. Why is business described as a circle? Because in business, you're always wheeling and dealing, you're traveling, you're going to the place to buy merchandise, then you're going around to sell the merchandise. You're always going in circles. So there's a joke told, it's a half a joke and half very serious, that you have people who kill themselves to earn a living, and you ask them, why are you working so hard? You don't have day, you don't have night, you don't have time for leisure, you have no time for study, you have no time for anything else. He says, I'm doing this for the child. Then you have the child, and the child grows up, and the child does the same thing as the father. He's involved in the business, and he doesn't have time for anything. It's for the child. So we're searching for that child for whom everyone is working day and night. Who is that child for whom everyone is working? So that's another way of interpreting the idea of business being a circle. When you're constantly going, if I give someone something, and he gives it to the next person in a circle, and he keeps on giving it keeps on going around and around, and it doesn't benefit anyone because it's constantly going in a circle. How do you get out of that circle? How do you get out of that cycle? You get out of that cycle by studying Torah. So business is important, and it's definitely sanctioned. It's not something that is not kosher. But you have to realize that business, you're going in circles, and you have to have the ability to break out of those circles.
Torah breaks the pattern because you're interfacing with Ein Sof.
But Torah, and that's the next point, is also a circle. It's also called schora. It goes in circles. But the difference is that this metaphor of a circle has two opposite meanings. One meaning of a circle is that it's something that it doesn't get you anywhere. You're just going in the same circle over and over again. It's like me getting lost with my car, and I go in a neighborhood, I can keep on going around and around. But it's not productive. But a circle is also a metaphor for infinity. It's something that has no end. That's why a Hebrew word, one of the Hebrew words for a song, which is also the word for a ring, is shir. Shir means a song, but shir is also, in Mishnaic Hebrew, is also a ring. A ring is round. And that's why we give a ring for marriage, because we're trying to introduce the infinite God into the relationship. So a circle is a sign of infinity or a sign of futility. So business could either be futility or it could be infinity. That's our choice. It depends on what we do with the business, how we conduct our business. Obviously, the business has to be conducted honestly, with integrity. And at the same time, you have to recognize that business is not the end. It's only the means. The next part of the Mishnah is, in a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. So there are several interpretations of that. Someone would say, if there are no men, you have to go to the woman. There are no men. But over here, the word men is generic. It doesn't mean male. It means person. But in Hebrew, there is no neuter. So it's always in the masculine. But it could be referring to a woman as well. In a place where there are no people, in other words, there's no one who's qualified, you have to strive to be the one. So the Rambam takes this to mean it's part of it's a continuum. The whole mission is about learning. That if you're a boor, you can't learn. If you're ignorant, you can't be pious. If you don't ask questions, and so on and so forth. And if you're just too much engrossed in business, you're not going to become smarter. But the Rambam says that this too goes in that direction. In a place where you don't have anyone to teach you, you don't have anyone to give you wisdom. So you're it's not because you're in business, but because you don't have the right educational system for you. So what do you do? Does it mean, okay, I'm not, I don't have a teacher, I don't have anyone who can teach me, I'll just do nothing, or just get involved in my business more than I have to? I think I told this story not too long ago about this chassid who got into business, and the business was boots, making boots. And he got so engrossed in his business that he took off time from his studies. So his Rabbi told him, I heard of people putting their feet in their boots, but I never heard of a person putting his head in his boots. So you're putting your head in the boots to the exclusion of everything else. See, so if that's going to stand in your way of learning, but if you don't have anyone to teach you, what should you do? Should you put your head in boots? And the answer is no. You have to learn on your own as much as you can. Nowadays, we have no excuses, fortunately or unfortunately. We have the internet, and it has access to more knowledge than was ever available to any human being in all of human history. Nobody ever had access. If you were a rich rabbi and you had a library in your house, you had a few hundred books. Some of the exceptions, there were a few rabbis who had a few thousand books. But I don't think anyone ever had a library. We're going back hundreds of years, more than 5,000 volumes. Now you have availability with different programs. I have a program, Chochma, has 130,000 Torah books, 130,000 with a search. So there's no excuses, and there are thousands and thousands of shiurim, of classes online, tens of thousands, on every imaginable subject within Torah. So if your person says, I don't have a teacher, he says, what do you mean you don't have a teacher? You have the internet. You have Google, Rabbi Google, and now it's Rabbi ChatGPT.
And YouTube.
And YouTube, you have everything. Yes.
Is there any thought of organizing or codifying the wealth of contemporary Jewish knowledge in a way that, like we did with Talmud during the dispersion of...
Well, there's a work called Encyclopedia Talmudis. It has about 50 volumes so far, and it's only about halfway finished. So that's one attempt at doing that. There are many, many different attempts at trying to consolidate to make it easier to find things. And of course, now we have searches on the computer. So even though it's not a good idea to be an autodidact, in other words, to teach yourself, if you have the ability to connect to a teacher, because much of Judaism, and the bulk of Judaism, is based on Masorah, handing things over from teacher to student, from parent to child. If we don't have the human connection, we're missing a tremendous amount of the nuances, the flavor, the details. So you could learn a lot on your own, and even on the internet you could learn a lot. But if you don't have a human, a living entity, it's not the ideal. But though it's not the ideal, if you don't have anyone to learn from, you're living in a hick town somewhere, and there's no one available, then you have to try to learn on your own as much as you can. That seems the Rambam's approach, and in the Jewish tradition there were autodidacts, but there's no such thing as a total autodidact, someone who didn't have any teachers whatsoever. There was a great rabbi known as the Rogachover. He came from the town of Rogachov. He was the greatest Talmudic genius of the 20th century, Rabbi Yosef Rosen. So he had teachers as a child, but he so surpassed his teachers so quickly. The Rebbe as well had some teachers, but he was mostly an autodidact, and many others. If there's no one to teach you because they're not qualified, because you're smarter than them, then you get as much as you can from them, and then you do with the rest on your own. So that's the Rambam's approach, that we're talking about the knowledge of Torah. Rashi has a different approach. Hillel before said that you have to not separate yourself from the community. You have to be involved in the community. And one of the interpretations of Torah is good with derech eretz is that you have to be involved. You can't just become a hermit and just isolate yourself and just study Torah. So what happens if there's no community involvement? In other words, no one appointed you to be to be running the community. You don't have any official position. You're not the rabbi. You're not the president. You're not the leader in any way, you have to do it yourself. Where there's no one around, if there's no community around, and you say to yourself, me, I'm going to become the communal leader. It says, yeah, there's no one else. There's an expression that they used to say based on this, b'makom she'ein ish, in a place where there's no men, is herring eicha fish. Herring also, it rhymes. Herring becomes a fish. Herring is not a sophisticated fish. You have to, poor people would eat herring. But if there's no other, if you don't have any gourmet fish, herring is also qualified. We're at least herrings. So if we're not fancy salmon, we're at least herrings.
It's one of the healthiest.
Okay, but that's the way the saying goes. I can't help. So you do what, if no one else is doing it, you do it. And even if other people are doing, it's an organized community, but there are always things that are not being done by the organized community. When I studied in Melbourne, Australia, there was a chassid who was a business person, and the Rabbi wanted him to be involved in business. And he was a very charitable person, very wealthy, and he gave everything away, virtually everything away, to charity. But he complained to the Rebbe. He says, it's a very organized community. Melbourne, Australia is one of the nicest, most organized, most productive, most flourishing Jewish communities in the world. And it has about 50,000 Jews, and there are about 6,000 children in Jewish day schools of the 50,000. So it's an incredible community. And he said to the Rebbe, he said, I don't have a role in the community. You wanted me to be in business. Well, I'm in business. I study Torah. I have people coming to my house, they're guests, but I don't have any role in the community. So what should I do? So the Rebbe says there's always things that the community, as organized as it is, neglect. You find those things that they neglect and you do it. And that's what he did. He found things that the communal leaders didn't focus on because they were busy with other things, and I'm not putting them down for that. And he found those things and he devoted his life to those little things that everyone neglected. There's room for every individual in a community setting. So if the community is not doing it, that's a sign that it was left for you as an individual to do. So that's when the Jews traveled in the desert. They traveled in a configuration of 4 different groups. There were 12 tribes, and there were 4 groups of 3 tribes each. The last group was the camp of Dan. And the Torah describes, what did they do? They gathered in all the groups, which is interpreted to mean that if anyone lost anything, they would pick it up, because they were the last ones to travel. That was the first lost and found, and they were the ones who delivered the lost things to the people who owned it. In other words, no matter how organized and how structured and how efficient a community could be, there's always something gets lost. And even though this was the lowest of the tribes, they were considered to be the most inferior of the tribes, they had a niche. Everyone has a niche in the Jewish world. And therefore, if there's no community, you become that community. That's your niche. And if there is a community, there's always something that's left out that they don't do. Where do we find a similar thing? Moses was the first example of this. Moses comes out of the palace. He's now an adult, he's a prince, and he sees an Egyptian taskmaster is beating a Jew. And Moses looks here, he looks there, and he sees there is no person, and he takes the law in his own hands, and he gets rid of the Egyptian and saves the Jew. So one interpretation is, what does it mean he looked here, he looked there, and he saw there's no person? It doesn't mean he just looked physically to see if there's anyone watching him. Of course he did that as well. But he saw there's no one is willing to help. How many times did we read in the news, someone is being beaten and the people are watching and taking their cameras out, their phones out? That's one of the new things for a phone, that when there's a crime, you're going to take a picture of the crime and let the crime happen. No one does anything. So that's what Moses saw. He saw no one cares that a Jew is being beaten. He says, who am I to do it? I'm a prince. He said, but he did. He realized that that's his niche, and that he is the one who has to take the law in his own hands. And this is the tradition of so many great Jewish leaders. The last thing they wanted to be was to be leaders. Contrary to secular leadership, and in some cases even religious leadership, nobody wanted to be, Moses did not want to be a leader. Moses shunned leadership. He was the most humble person. And throughout history, Hillel did not want to become a leader. And in our generation, the Rabbi, for a full year, when people were begging him to assume leadership, he refused to accept leadership. At one point, he even threatened that if people keep on harassing him to become a leader, he's going to flee, he's going to run away and disappear, no one will ever know where he is. That's how reluctant he was to be a leader. And what got him to accept, the Rebbe's wife told him that if you don't take the position, all my father's work, his predecessor, and all his predecessors' work will go down the drain. You have no choice. Sometimes it takes a woman to make sure that the man takes the opportunity to do what he has to do. So even though you don't want to be a communal worker, you have to take the initiative. And sometimes you have to even work against the community. Sometimes community leaders, like the city of Sodom, was the model for corrupt community leaders. And you have communities where the leaders, secular and religious, could be corrupt. And you could say to yourself, I know it's corrupt, but why should I get involved? You have no choice. There's no one else to set things straight, to do things right. You have to get involved. As uncomfortable as it is, and it's against human nature to want to be involved in all that chaos, you have no choice. You have to step forward and take the initiative. And that's the definition of a Jew who was called Ivri. Abraham was called, he wasn't called Jew, he wasn't called Israelite, because there was no Israel yet. Israel is the name of his grandson. And Yehudi came about based on the name of the leading tribe, the tribe of Yehuda, which centuries later. So what was Abraham called? And Jews are also given that title, Ivri. What does Hebrew mean? Hebrew means the other side. He was on one side and the whole world was on the other side. That means he had to stand up against the whole world. That was the definition of a Jew. A Jew, even if the whole world says it's day and you know it's night, you don't say, well, if they want to say it's day, let them live in their darkness. I'm going to assert the truth. So that's Rashi's approach, that it's not about Torah learning per se, it's about communal responsibility, that if there's no one in the community to do it, you have to do it. Rabbeinu Yonah, one of the great medieval sages, it's talking about your standards of morality, standards of righteousness. It says, even when there's no one around, and you could say, why should I be moral? Why should I be righteous? Everyone else is not. Everyone else is corrupt. Let me join the crowd. No, you have to maintain your own standard. And this is what happened when Jews came over in the early 20th century, what you were referring to. It was very, very hard for Jews to be observant, especially when it came to Shabbos. Because if you didn't work on Shabbos, you didn't have a job, and there was no welfare, there was no Medicaid, there was no food stamps. You would have to depend, you literally beg from door to door. So it was a tremendous challenge. And likewise, everything, Jewish education, it was so lacking, it's hard to describe. And yet there were individuals who stood up against the grain and says, we're not going to relax our standards. And we're going to maintain the highest standards of Judaism, regardless of the fact that everyone else has not maintained that standard. So, essentially what it's saying over here is, Either when it comes to Torah knowledge, if there's no one to teach you, you have to learn yourself. It becomes the communal work. If the community isn't doing it, you have to do it. And then when it comes to standards, your own spiritual standards, you have to maintain the highest standards, regardless of the fact that you're going to stick out. You'll be like, you're an aberration. You have to maintain those standards. And there were people who did that. And those are heroes. And that's why Judaism is still alive in America, because there were such people. Just going back for one other thing. When it said over here that a person who engages too much in business cannot become wise. Now in Hebrew, the word wise is machkim. The root of that word is chacham. So everyone probably heard the word chacham, wise person, but it's much more than a wise person. There's in the intellectual sphere, there's this intellectual faculty called Chochma, and there's the intellectual faculty called Binah. What's the difference between the two? Chochma is conceptual knowledge, where you conceive of an idea. Binah is where you construct the idea, you take it apart and you flesh out the details and you analyze. It's the power of analysis. The difference between Chochma and Binah, there are many differences, but one of the salient differences is that Binah is where you are in control of the idea. You have the idea in your grasp and you're dissecting it. It's like the doctor, the scientist, the pathologist who dissects an organ. He has control over it and he's taking it apart. Chochma is where the idea controls you, where you're open to the idea and you're totally humble. Binah is not humble, and I'm not using the word humble in a moral sense, because when you engage in analysis, you have to use your faculties fully. Otherwise, it's not analysis.
Personalized.
Is it personalized? Not necessarily. It could be an intellectual idea, but you're the master of that idea. You're controlling the idea in your mind. The way you understand things, obviously, everyone has their way of understanding. That's Binah. Chochma is where you open your mind to the idea. Let the idea overwhelm you. It's like a flash of lightning. When you see a flash of lightning, the lightning controls you. You don't control. You just open yourself to witness it. You could be capable of Binah, of developing an idea and analyzing an idea, even if you're involved in business. The business preoccupation doesn't take away, because it uses the same power of Binah. But to open yourself to an idea, to have that humility, to allow the idea to control you, and to be completely open and receptive, that's something that is unique to Torah. Because Torah, because it's God's wisdom, when you're aware of that, you're humbled by that. You say, I'm just opening myself to the teachings of Torah. Let the teachings overwhelm me. Let it saturate me. Then you have to use your intellect to analyze the idea. But you first have to have the Chochma. You first have to have the which is hard to translate. They translate it as wisdom, but it's more than wisdom. It means the humility. It's like the difference between seeing something and learning something. When you see something, it's not about you. It's the vision, the sight that overwhelms you, that takes over you. And that's the level of Torah that is unique to Torah. So if you're too much involved in business, even though business acumen, business intelligence could contribute to your Binah approach to Torah, it can't contribute to your Chochma level of Torah, because general knowledge is not that receptive to the idea of humility.
Where does, Chabad, Chochma, Binah, Dot, where does Dot fit into this?
Okay, there's a third intellectual power called Dat, or Das, which they translate as knowledge. And that's the next step. When you finally fully master a subject, you can then take it to the next level where you attach itself to you. Das is intimacy. Adam knew Eve. It's a physical intimacy, but it means when there's a spiritual intimacy with the idea. If you want to be emotionally involved with the idea, not just intellectually, you have to have das. If you're studying the medicine, let's say, and you study that this particular behavior is not healthy, smoking, for example, is unhealthy, you have the Chochma, you have the Binah, you have the knowledge, the concept, and you have the full understanding of it. And after the lecture where you were told how dangerous it is, you go out and you light a match, light a cigarette, and smoke. That you can have the Chochma and the Binah, you didn't have the Das.
The das only comes generally over time. Time must...
It comes with effort. You have to keep on attaching yourself to the idea till it becomes part of you. And once it becomes part of you, you develop the requisite emotions and feelings, whether it's a feeling of attachment to it or feelings of rejection of it. Yes?
How do you define a chacham?
Well, sometimes we use the word to mean a wise guy. Sometimes it means a smart person. It can be used as a smart person. But if you want to get in technical, a chacham is someone who's receptive to knowledge, who's very creative, can conceptualize ideas. There are certain scientists, who I'm sure you're probably one of them, who have brilliant ideas. And other scientists who take someone else's brilliant ideas and they flesh out the details and they analyze it and they apply it. They don't have that much creativity, intellectual creativity. So Chochma is the creativity and Binah is the development of it. Any other questions on Zoom? A Talmud Chacham is a student of a Chacham, because the Chacham is the one who has the concept. The Talmud is the one who receives the concept.
Tamid is always, isn't it? Is it Tamid?
Talmud is student. Tamid is always.
Isn't there a word that's always Chacham? What is that?
A Chacham is the sage himself. The Talmud Chacham is the student of the Chacham.
He's talking about Tamid.
Tamid.
Tamid is constant.
Yeah.
But it's a totally different word, not related.